Welcome to the Q&A for tonight's screening, Return to Seoul. And we are fortunate to have our guest tonight, the screenwriter and director, Davy Chou. Welcome, Davy, and thank you for your time.
Hi, Sarah.
So the first question is kind of a very perhaps predictable question, but what was your inspiration for tackling this very specific story? It's a very specific story and a very specific character. How did this come to be?
Sure, I think it's a good starting point actually to understand where the film come from. It actually came from a real story that I have experienced in 2011, so quite a while ago, and it was my very first time to go to South Korea. It was actually the world premiere of my very first feature-length film, which was a documentary named 𝙀𝙊𝙀𝙀𝙀, which I shot in Cambodia, where I partly live actually. And so I was going to South Korea. I was so excited because it was the first time. I didn't know much about it. And then before going, I received a phone call from a very good friend of mine who I used to study with in Paris. And her name is 𝙁𝙊𝙀𝙀𝙀. She's the inspiration of 𝙀𝙃𝙀𝙀𝙀, meaning that she was herself born in South Korea and adopted by French parents around 1 year old. And then she told me, I heard you're going to South Korea. I just put 1 week holidays in my work, and I'm going to go with you and show you my country. And she didn't let me the choice. So you could already see somehow the essence of the character freely in her own impulsivity / unpredictability, I would say, and also leadership, because she didn't give me a choice. And so we were in that trip. And it's important to know that before that, she had went back there. She had returned there for 2 years, a bit similarly to the film. She had met her biological father twice. It didn't go well from her own saying, and then she went back to France. And so when we went there, she already knew a bit about Korea, but one thing she really stressed on before going was, I don't want to meet my father, my biological father. I hate him. That's basically what she told me. And I said, okay, no problem. And then after 2-3 days being in Busan Film Festival, so it's the largest Asian film festival actually in Asia, and then hanging out there and partying a bit, which again was for me the first joy of being in a film festival. She told me, I just texted my father, I'm gonna meet him tomorrow, do you wanna come with me? And I said yes. And that was really me being a bit like Tena, embarked in that trip, being the friend in support. The day after a 1 hour and a half drive bus, I was just facing that encounter between her and her father biological family. And it was really that moment of witnessing, I believe, retrospectively, the contrast between what I would have imagined of such a scene, which I believe to have been more expressive, maybe more emotion expressed, more connection between the two, more stories shared. And on the opposite, as in the film, it was a bit dry, very heavy, much into uncommunicability from every kind of sides, whether it was language or culture or too much deep undigested emotion to unfold, and that was it. And I was deeply marked and shocked by that scene. I kept it in my mind. I took notes at the time, but not with the idea of I'm gonna make a film soon, but somehow like that's special, and I should keep some memory of that. And after my last film, and Diamond Island, which I shot also in Cambodia, and it was 2017, I was like trying to find an idea, and I had the opportunity to go to London where she was living, selling weapons there actually, which is also based on real story.
Oh, really?
And
I was curious where
yes,
that's so specific. I was curious. That's so interesting.
a lot of things actually come from the real story, and of course after there is a work of fiction in which I put different things of myself and other stories I collected from other adoptees, but a lot of detail come from a real story. And so I opened myself to her about this suggestion of doing a film about her. She said yes immediately, and I believe few days later she wrote me some kind of summary of her life in Korea, and 2 weeks later she sent me like a 40 pages document full of details and photos about her trip, her several trips there, and her constant return to Korea. And that became the basis of the script.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. On the one hand, my experience as a viewer of this film, on the one hand, I felt like, okay, this is a very, thoughtfully crafted and, a lot of creativity at play in terms of the cinematography and the aesthetic choices. But it did also feel like you were saying, like, here is a story about the phenomenon of international Korean adoption. So you have quite a focused lens on the subject matter, but I felt like there was a really beautiful interweaving of creative choices to bring that to life. And everything from when she's at the Hammond Adoption Center and she's flipping open that book and you see that snapshot of, I thought it was quite a clever way for you to impart that information, really quite how significant that wave of international adoptions were in the wake of the socioeconomic upheaval after the Korean War. I was like, okay, so
I think it's a tricky balance to find between the thematic, like the topic as big as it is, and how you're gonna make a story out of it. And I was very cautious of not having the topic being too present in a way, and overtaking the place of what at the end of the day I really wanted to express, which was the inner life and the intimacy and the emotional trajectory and evolution of that character. And it became quite obvious starting to write the film after the first intuition that I really wanted to get into her, into a character that was obviously a bit special, let's say, like complex, not the usual delicate character that you expect to see in such kind of journey to the root story or adoption story. And because of that personality, which come from reality, inspired from my friend, this kind of way to refuse to be labeled, to refuse to be identified into like categories and easy boxes, the way she kind of easily saying no and then confront things, that became like the motor of the fiction to help me derouting, I will say, the film out of what will be such like a big topic film. And so it definitely deals with adoption. And I read I make my research about international adoption in general, but also specifically on the story of South Korea and how it became somehow like the country where there was the biggest number of babies sent in history. They say in the film like around 220,000 in like few decades, which is totally crazy.
It is really
and insane, like to just think of it. But I didn't want to make like I don't say in English a dossier film, like a Erin Brockovich type of film, stuff like that. Exactly. So because at the end of the day, it was really about that woman and her trajectory and how to follow her, and that was really what I wanted to touch. So it's always a balance. So you have the book and you have few information, and there is a lot of off-camera thing in the film that there is a lot of ellipses. You never know what happened 25 years before. There is very few, not to say extremely few, information about her life in France, and it's up to the audience to kind of fill the gaps. And for me, I have some kind of precise idea of what could have happened in before and in between, but it's the play with the writing to kind of put very few hints and up to the audience to kind of guess.
Yeah, I like that. And the nature of certain relationships in her life and so forth, that boyfriend who she's with and
exactly.
And sort of the last third or so of the film. And that's a good segue to one of the other questions I had, which was, you do make these, clearly very, constructed leaps in time, like the structure of the film is very much built around these chronological leaps. And I'm curious, most films are, having, depicting some sort of more condensed, continuous, chronological unfolding of events. You make some really interesting leaps. What was the inspiration for that, and what were you trying to achieve, creatively as a storyteller with that device?
I think I've always been deeply touched by films that where at the end of the film you feel that the time has really passed and you as an audience have experienced this passing of time. that can be 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 film, or even like a film like Boyhood by Richard Linklater, a lot
Yeah.
of films. But like when you have this feeling, even like watching The Godfather, the trilogy in one day, that's something like so special as an audience to experience. That's the first thing. The second thing is when I decided to make that story, that was in 2017, and when I experienced meeting the parents of the dad of my friend with her, it was 2011. So it's been 6 years later, and so I could also talk to her about where she was at that moment. And it happened that like few months after I opened myself to her, we ended up being again in Busan Film Festival and again meeting her father after 6 years. So I had this experience of meeting him twice.
Right.
And pretty early in the writing, at the moment of crisis of legitimacy, I would say, when I was kind of like asking myself questions, like usual question that writers ask themselves, such as, why am I telling that story? I'm not Korean, I'm not adoptee, I'm not a woman. So is it much of an opportunistic thing that I want to tell? Why is that to deal with me making that story? And it's the moment where you nearly abandon, if I may say, the story, that you find the deep reason why you wanted to do it, which was also that it was deeply personal. I was born in France from Cambodian parents. They escaped Cambodia in a way. In 73, they came to study, and after there was the Khmer Rouge regime and the genocide, and they lost all their family, our family there, and they had no other choice after the Khmer Rouge regime in the early 80s to decide to stay in France, and that country will be their future and the future of their kids. And that's how, in that context, I was born in. But since I was 25, which is the same age as Freddie, when I was 25, I went to Cambodia for the first time in a very like naive way, I would say, to think that that's going to be a 6-month trip that will not affect my life and I will go back to France and go on my life in France. But no, it deeply affected my life. And now I'm living between the two countries. I producing film there, I make 2 feature films there. So definitely it kind of take another the direction for certain aspect of my life. So just that to say that the trajectory that Freddie is going through, the kind of spirit she has at the beginning of the film and at the end, it's something I feel so related to. And I had to discover throughout the process of writing that was maybe the most personal film I will do, but somehow like hidden behind a character which is not me. And so when this was clear, the notion of time became essential for me, because again, the personality of Freddie is helping me to somehow counter attack the usual narrative about journey to the roots thing. Like, I don't know, if on the base of the pitch, I believe that people will kind of expect a certain kind of film that I really wanted not that my film would not be. Like a delicate story of introspection, as you say, in some time of unity of time, in which after this 2 or 3 weeks first trip, the main character will face difficulties, but at the end of that trip, she will find peace and reconciliation and closure and understanding of her true self and reconnect everything and happy ending.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's
and
true. Yeah.
yeah, and I used to see that not only films, but you see documentaries, books, I don't know, like radio, like TV program and stuff about that. And as much as I could love happy ending sometime and crave for that as normal audience, sometimes it's bothering, because I believe that people facing this kind of stories tend to believe in that because it's easy to, it's not easy, it's like we need to believe in something. And I believe pretty with that kind of music thing that she listened also have some kind of relationship to some kind of certain form of faith, I would say. But in this particular thing of this kind of cliche narration and narratives, gives us some kind of false hopes that when after you like doing your real experience of life, it's kind of brutal when you just take the world into your face. So somehow Freddie, with her not easy personality, it's an antidote for me to kind of bring us to kind of tear apart a veil of illusion, to kind of push us to confront to a certain truth. And I believe that when she has this kind of way to confront, it's only time and the understanding that what she learned through her many transformation of herself, different attempts to still try to turn around and get closer to that kind of answer she's looking for, that the time is giving her some kind of answer, and that was very important. And so that's how the structure of the film came clear. And sometimes I read reviews of the film and even like opinions on Twitter, and I can see that part of the audience sometimes feel a bit frustrated that they will expect the first part to be the full film.
Yeah.
But for me, it wouldn't be the film I want to make. It's so important that
Yeah.
something is getting out after these 8 years that we follow the character for.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you said just now is so. I'm so glad I asked that question, because it you know, I see so many films, of course, with my work, and I think what you say about the you know, a more condensed time frame, you know, that type of storytelling, calling for a more, you know, an unrealistic, accelerated a representation of life, you know, and you know, more of a forced or contrived representation of how things come together, and you know, sort of forcing a neater or more concise unfolding of events. And I think that's a really good point. So I hear what you're saying. So just I actually really liked how you, you know, left, instead of spelling everything out, left a little bit of a, you know, as I would put it, like a trail of breadcrumbs, you know, leading your audience, but not saying exactly where to go. The one thing that I found myself a little bit confused by, and I'm curious if you want the audience to be left guessing a little bit, or if there was more intention there, was her her interaction and engagement and expectation toward her father and her mother were so starkly different. You know, her father is, you know, an emotional wreck, you know, really, you know, and you know, to use very modern parlance, like invading her space, you know, really like crowding her. And I don't know if it's his approach that's not effective, or if she just finds his personality annoying. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's the emotional, her mother's emotionally shut down, whether because of trauma or shame or both, or maybe she is just someone who is detached. You know, there maybe the explanations are not intended to be revealed, but you know, is it a case of, you know, people want what they can't have, right? Is it a craving that's stemming from that very you know, fundamental aspect of human nature? Or is it, you know, the fact that it's her mother? You know, so if you could talk a little bit about her very stark.
Yeah, but to be honest, I think you already say everything. So I will just develop on the few ideas you had, because that's exactly what I will answer.
Yes.
The first thing I will say is that, and I think everybody will resonate with that, but when I make research and I met adoptees and I read about them, and I even watched a very good documentary by a French director, herself adopted, named 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 it was released 2 years ago, and it was a story for herself, une histoire à soi. All the time you hear adoptees talking a lot about the mom that they haven't met. It's rarely on the father, but they're obsessed with their mom. So just that's a universal thing in a way. It sometimes can have exception, but the relationship to the mom is just something culturally, but I believe biologically speaking, that is just here. So it will already give us some answers on the difference for Freddie between one another. The second one, exactly as you said, I believe that people always want what they don't have, and that's just a normal, natural dynamic that we have. And I was thinking a lot of the topic of addiction making the film, that Freddie is someone who definitely has a relationship with addiction, not only the alcohol and the drug that she can take in the film, but his addiction in so many aspects of becoming addicted to that country that she didn't want to know anything about, and that she kind of hate when she comes, but that she return all the time there. And she has different aspects of her life, in which one that she tried to really integrate herself and being fully Korean, and suddenly leave it for 5 years, but then coming back and thinking that, and it's really the pattern of addictive person, and the addiction she has also in human relationship, all these people that she always absorb. And people will sometimes say that she doesn't know how to love people. I don't agree with that. I think that someone, you can see the first scene, she have a friendly crush on Tena, and she purely feel attracted to her, and I think she's good to her as well. Even her personality is so big that you can always have to be careful, but then is someone who also have some kind of addictive relationship with people, in which is always a love and hate relationship. And as soon as she can feel the possibility of an end of relationship, she can't resist, and she needs to be the one anticipating and organizing that end. So all this kind of thing to say that I think the fact that the mother doesn't answer, of course, it's become some kind of an obsession, and the fact that the father answers immediately, kind of, she has too much and she rejects. But the other thing I will say as well is that one thing I was thinking of a lot in the film, which I believe is also the one big question of all the film I've been making so far, is the question of distance, which is basically the one question of the mise en scène. And here it's really about someone who is so far from her own self. It means story and origin and country, let's say, and goes there, like decide to kind of jump and reduce the distance into some kind of impulse that make her too close to things. That's how the film starts, with this over close-up, like super close-up on the two faces, such as if her sudden impulse to go to Korea make her feel like she can't see at the right distance, she's too close, but that's the only way that she could push herself to come. And after, when she meets the father, the one thing that she feels, I think, like really like internally, that he doesn't respect is the distance. And I believe in the Renoir, in the Jean Renoir saying that everybody has his reasons. In the film, everybody trying to, I mean, the world is made of people trying to do good things, and sometimes it's not good things, but they're trying to be good. And if I try to put myself into the perspective of the father, I believe he's trying to do the best he thinks it's the best to do in that kind of situation. He's full of guilt, and he feels that what he needs to do is to play suddenly the role of the father he hasn't been, and to show to his daughter how much guilt he feels and how much he wants to repair these broken things, and say, as he say in the film, you should come back to Korea, learn Korean, and marry a Korean guy and live with us. But for Freddie, it's impossible to conceive, and what she really feels, I think, hurt with, is that he doesn't respect the basic distance that she feels from her own perspective as adoptee and victim of the situation, that he should respect the fact that he hasn't been a father for 25 years, so he cannot improvise being a father. So I think this question of distance, this misunderstanding or misconception of different perspective of distance from the different characters, is what make it impossible to connect on the first part. And I believe, again, going back to what we said, time is the key factor that eventually 7 years later, when they meet again in that restaurant, in the third act of the film, I think they kind of find some kind of right distance toward each other. Right. And then they can find the contact, because if you think of contact between the father and Freddie, I think there is one time when he buy her the ballet shoes, it just touched her a bit, her hand, and then he grabs her at the end of the first part at night, in the night scene when he's drunk, and it's a violent thing for her. So that's how she's just having this dialogue to say, "Don't touch me." But finally, she's the one asking him to touch her broken clavicle at the end. Yes. And that's the right distance, because she's the one asking. It has to deal with consentment as well. And then he does it, but he does it in a very soft way. So it's all the film is about how time maybe is the key factor that can help us finding, even if it's only the 52 seconds of the music the father is playing, but the right synchronization in emotion and feeling between each other. And the last thing I will say is it has to deal maybe with the patriarchal dimension of current society as well. Maybe the instinct of Freddie, that the mother is maybe the victim of the situation, because when you read about it, you can understand that there was many factors for this massive international adoption from South Korea, but one of the big factors were that single mothers in Korea were absolutely impossible status to live through. Right. So if you have a kid and you're not married, you don't exist anymore. Right. Nobody will respect you. So, I mean, and Korea is not the only patriarchal country in the world, of course, but in that specific story, it was very strong. So it's very thin in the film, the way, again, I didn't want to make an issue film, but that's, for me, it's also the way that she rejected her dad and kind of not having the same anger towards the mom also deals with intuition of the character of the patriarchal dimension as a source of that story.
Yes, yeah, I was actually considering that too, that, you know, that scene where she finally meets her mother, the emotion of that really kind of hit me unexpectedly. And, you know, I don't even think that they exchange a word, and just the touch and the tears, it's very intense emotionally, and very powerful. So, you know, I think you did a really effective job of hitting home the emotion there. And, you know, there was just a sense that she was bearing shame, you know, that the mother was bearing shame. I don't know even know how I'm deducing that, but that was something that did come through to me, that was what was creating her emotional, her psychological and emotional stagnancy. So
but talking about the physical contact between the father and Freddie, it's interesting to know that when she meets the mom is asking to the employee, can I touch her? That's something that ex-employee of such adoption center, when I was asking them, like, how does it happen, the reunion, will they say something and stuff? First, it's interesting to note that actually the young employee at the end of the film, she was the one working at the real adoption center, and she was the one, like, I got a lot of information from, like, the
really?
realism stuff.
So she was oh wow.
She didn't speak French. When I met her, she was speaking English, and then she learned French for the role, which was nice from her because we had French funding, so somehow we had to have French language. But she told me that was so crazy that I don't think I could have like invented it. That sometime mother will ask, "Can I touch him or her?" And it's so strong, like a father or mother asking, "Can I touch my kid?" Right? So it was like devastating for me to hear that. So that's what I put. And so yeah, she has at least the sensitivity to ask before touching. So that's also how,
Right. Well, that scene at the end is very powerful. Well, anyway, I know that you have other interviews lined up this morning.
Sure. Yeah.
And,
afternoon here, friends.
Yeah, so afternoon in France, sorry. So, but anyway, thank you again so much for, you know, sharing about your inspiration and process. I thought the film was
it was a pleasure
and beautifully directed and very, very moving. So, thank you for your time this afternoon rather. And, you know, best of luck with opening of the film, which is this Friday, February 17th in New York and Los Angeles, and then to be followed by a rollout, you know, and expanding into other markets. But thank you again, David.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Yes, absolutely. Bye-bye.